This is David Gray, Mandan, North Dakota. Today is January 26, 2023. Sacred Scripture, Sacred War, the Bible and the American Revolution by James Byrd is a comprehensive study exploring how American colonists used biblical texts to justify the revolution and inspire those that fought in it. Byrd shows that the Bible was a key text of the American Revolution. When war came, preachers and patriots alike turned to Scripture not only for solace but for exhortations to fight. Scripture helped amateur soldiers overcome their natural aversion to killing and gave Americans a sense of divine providence for their cause. In chapter 4, the focus is on David. Uh, Teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight, David's revolutionary heroism. In the introduction to sacred scripture, Byrd examines the use of the Bible in pre-revolutionary patriotism. The Revolutionary War erupted in an America that was well accustomed to conflict. Nearly every colonist before the Revolution had been affected by war in some major way. The American colonists were uniquely militant, but we cannot understand the place of Scripture in the Revolution without coming to terms with the colonists' wartime experiences. In his research, Byrd finds that David was the most vivid revolutionary character in all of Scripture. Byrd assesses the overwhelming popularity of David in colonial warfare, beginning in the French and Indian War and culminating in the Revolution. Throughout these years, patriots heralded David as a man after God's own heart from the book of Acts, which meant for them that David successfully united the two agendas of patriotic preaching, spiritual integrity and military prowess. First, let's examine David as warrior, the American David and the British Goliath. The story of David and Goliath is a tale of both inspiring and it's a warning. It was an inspiring story of an unexpected victory, young David vanquishing the mighty giant. It's also a warning that wartime victories are God's alone, bestowed by providence, and are outside the realm of human control. Any soldiers, military officers, or even kings who attempt to wage war without God's blessing risk disaster on the battlefield. Certainly, David was a skilled warrior, but he was not skilled enough to win battles without God's blessing. Accordingly, God's assistance was constantly evoked during the revolution, not only by clergy, but essentially all public figures and military leaders. Another aspect of David that appeared often in sermons was as a psalmist. In colonial America, no militant verse from Psalms surpassed the popularity of Psalms 144. Blessed be the Lord, my strength, which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. If the main lesson of the David and Goliath story was that victory in war came through God's blessing, many war psalms reminded colonists that God would bless neither idle soldiers or negligent nations. David's poetic proclamation that God taught his fingers to fight reminded American patriots that the destiny of war rested partially on their weapons and training and leadership, but ultimately God's favor was indispensable. Last, Byrd turns to the troubling aspect of David as king. In revolutionary America, images of David as a righteous and spiritual warrior overshadowed another image of David as Israel's most favored king. God chose David to be the king of Israel. How does that bode for pronouncements against monarchy? How did clergy argue that it was right to oppose King George III? Since Scripture heralded David as Israel's greatest king, he became the revolutionary patriots' ultimate obstacle to overcome in arguing against monarchy. Preaching against the king was troubling before the period of the Intolerable Acts of 1774. Conflicts with Britain in the 1760s were often thought of as the result of an overreaching parliament denying the rights of the colonists. But as Thomas Kidd points out in God of Liberty, a religious history of the American Revolution, the intolerable acts, specifically the Quebec Act, seemed like an outright portrayal of the American colonists' rights by the king and heavily eroded King George III's authority in America. Clergy made the case that King George III, like King David, was corrupted by kingly power and, as a consequence, erred against God and his people. David's royal authority led to his corruption as manifested in his adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. This narrative of adultery and murder began when David abandoned his soldierly virtues to assume the monarchical prerogatives of a king. The results were disastrous because while David's military service reinforced virtue and piety, kingship bred corruption and laxity. Accordingly, the case was made that King George III had been similarly corrupted by power and his ministers and was transformed into a tyrant and enemy of the people. A story of a good king gone bad, like David. Despite his tarnished image of a good king gone bad, preachers constantly insisted that spiritual men were not timid men, they were warriors, and David was the prime biblical model of this spiritual and martial valor. David was a key example of how patriotic ministers creatively adapted the Bible to their political and martial situations. Thank you for your attention.